right, so all the cleanups over 10 years that we've done for Be the Solution to Pollution, 13,672 pounds.
Wow.
Of that, this is going to blow your mind. Although you did the cleanup today, so I really shouldn't. Fort Phoenix, 9,616. And as you all know, most of that is light plastic. So you look at the number, you're like, oh, really? 10 years and that's all you got? But a Dunkin' Donuts styrofoam cup does not weigh a lot. All right, so we've got some great speakers today. These kids are our future. The reason I started this group was for the kids, because they deserve better. And we've got to change things. And kids, I want you to know that even though you can't vote, you have power. And you can change the world. You speak up, speak out, and you expect better, okay?
Hi.
Hi.
Whoa.
How are you?
Doing good.
All right, go Miles.
Okay. I'm upset because companies have been saying that they're recycling, but it doesn't happen. It's getting burned up or ending up on our beaches. It's more expensive to recycle than it is to make plastic. And when they make that plastic, they're emitting more fossil fuels, getting more money, and filling the world with trash. And the plastic trash doesn't stay here in the United States. We ship it to China, to Indonesia, and to many other countries. So today, we are asking companies to stop making so much plastic. And if you make the product, then you can deal with the waste.
Speech is about how plastic pollution is connected to the climate crisis. Greenhouse gases are emitted during every stage of a piece of plastic's life, whether it's during the extraction and transportation of plastic raw materials, manufacturing, waste treatment, or plastic entering the environment. Emissions are released into the atmosphere. The overproduction of greenhouse gases dangerously heats up the planet and plays a major factor in the climate crisis. How much emissions are created by plastic? Let's break it down phase by phase, beginning with the gathering of materials to construct plastic. Plastic is primarily composed of 3 fossil fuels: coal, natural gas, and crude oil. These industries are famously the main emitters of greenhouse gases, and the strategies they use to collect these materials, such as fracking, are terrible for the environment. The act of carrying these fuels to factories is also a source of emissions. In fact, estimates state that the transport and extraction of natural gas that will become a plastic raw material emits 12.5 million and 13.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. After the plastic is created, it is typically used once, for a single purpose. After it serves that purpose, it will most likely be landfilled, escape into the environment, incinerated, recycled, or recycled, though only 10% of plastics are actually recycled and reused. Plastics break down into tinier bits called microplastics. Not only do microplastics gradually let out gases as they divide, they disperse all around the Earth and into the oceans. Oceans and their creatures isolate between 30 and 50% of carbon dioxide emissions caused by human activities. Sea organisms like plankton are eating more and more amounts of microplastics, which lessen the productivity of photosynthesis and growth of microalgae. This weakens plankton's capacity to eliminate carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Incineration is another fate for single-use plastics. 12% of plastic is incinerated, or burned for energy. In 2015, the U.S. emitted 5.9 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent from plastics incineration. Projections state that if the trend of production and burning of plastics continues upward, greenhouse gas emissions will rise colossally to 49 million metric tons by 2030 and 91 million by 2050. As society starts to switch to alternative forms of energy, one of the primary sources of emissions will be from the burning of plastic packing waste. With this rate, Plastic's lifetime will emit 1.3 gigatons of greenhouse gases per year by the year 2030, claiming a large chunk of the carbon budget that aims to keep global temperatures from rising 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. I say plastic's lifetime, yet plastic will never fully decompose, and every piece of plastic that's already been made will continue to emit greenhouse gases. Plastic production is only going to increase, and with that, emissions will increase too. To end production, we must ban all plastics, beginning with plastic that has a single purpose. If it is not being reused, it is harming our environment, our climate, our health, and our futures. Thank you.
See in front of us and what we can do about it, since obviously the companies don't care. So you might be wondering what all this means and what we can do about it, and I thought the same thing. You see, I actually had a very hard time writing this speech, but this morning I was at a cleanup in Fall River, and it wasn't anything special. We were just simply picking up trash from cracks in the sidewalk and from bushes off the street, and I realized that yeah, it might help if these companies came up with more sustainable products so that we wouldn't have to be dealing with this in the first place, but at the same time, we can still do something while we wait. Because if we don't, the trash we see around us is just going to keep piling up. And though this makes me angry to think that we are the ones that have to do something to clean up this mess, it's better than looking outside and seeing trash everywhere. So I came up with something I like to call STEP. Stop, think, educate, and preserve. Stop. This one's pretty straightforward. Stop before you throw your wrapper into the woods. Stop before you buy yet another plastic water bottle. Think. Think about what you could do instead of buying that plastic water bottle. Think about me and everyone else speaking today and why we're up here. Educate. Educate yourself and then eventually others on why we shouldn't buy plastics and why we need to be careful with what we use. Preserve. This is a little bit more of a goal to preserve this precious planet we live on. I believe that if we go through this one step every day, you won't have to be ashamed when you look around. Hope can be spread instead of the anger, sadness, and fear that we feel when we see all this trash. So please, consider taking this step with me, and maybe, just maybe, these companies will too.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Larry DeSalvatore, and we are so glad that you are here for No Time to Waste, Toxic Plastic and the Climate Crisis, presented in partnership with the Massachusetts South Coast chapter of the Climate Reality Project. South Coast Progressive Voices is an occasional speaker series offered by the Unitarian Universalist Society of Fairhaven. We address issues of broad public interest. Tonight's webinar is supported in part by the Fund for Unitarian Universalist Social Responsibility. We are always looking for ideas for topics and speakers. If you have an idea, something you would like to see us addressing, please be in touch at ldesalvatore@comcast.net. We're also always looking for folks who are willing to be part of South Coast Progressive Voices and help us put on these events. So again, be in touch. Please join us this fall for a new slate of online and in-person presentations, possible topics. We're still chewing on them, trying to see what we might be putting together, but possible topics for this coming season include more on climate change and climate justice. The issue's not going away and neither will we. Greater New Bedford affordable housing, the Fair Share Amendment to the Massachusetts Constitution, women's prisons in Massachusetts, civics education and critical race theory. Those are just a small smattering of what we might be doing. So again, be in touch if you have ideas. A little bit of information about Zoom webinars. Some of you may not be familiar with the webinar format, may be more familiar with meetings on Zoom. First off, if you would find the participants button on your device, often it's on a menu bar, either at the top or the bottom of your screen. That's where you can see who else has joined this webinar. That's where you can change your name. We do ask you, in fact, to make a change to your name as it appears in the participant list. We ask you to add your personal pronouns. That's she, hers, they, theirs, he, his, etc. It's not always obvious what pronouns individuals use to self-identify. And if we all list our pronouns, it signals that this is a safe space that helps make this process of clarification normative for all of us. A webinar is different from a Zoom meeting. Neither your camera nor your microphone can be enabled. There are two ways to communicate with us during this webinar. The first is the chat button. Already there have been a number of posts to the chat button. This is where you can make any comments you'd like to make during the presentation. Do not use it, however, to ask questions. Instead, use the Q&A button, which also should appear on a menu either at the top or the bottom of your screen. Use the Q&A button to pose your questions. We'll be monitoring Q&A, and we'll try to respond to as many of your questions as possible during the latter part of tonight's presentation. You can support South Coast Progressive Voices and allow us to continue doing this important work. Our speaker series, including tonight's presentation, is offered free of charge. You are welcome, however, to make a donation. There are two ways to do so. You can go to our website at www.uufairhaven.org. Be sure to specify SCPV when you use the donate button there. You can also write a check to UUSF and mail it to the church at 102 Green Street, Fairhaven, 02719. Again, be sure to specify SCPV for South Coast Progressive Voices. Tonight's order of presentation. First, we will hear a welcome from our partner in tonight's presentation, from Laura Gardner from the Climate Reality Project, South Coast Chapter. Then a welcome from UUSF and our minister, Reverend Jordan Nelson Long, who will also be the moderator tonight. And so she'll also be framing the discussion. She will introduce our panelists, and then you will hear from each of them briefly. First, an overview from Be the Solution to Pollution. It was a Be the Solution to Pollution event that if you joined us early, you were watching a little video clip from before we started. That will be followed by an overview of Break Free from Plastic. Finally, a video and overview from Rise St. James. St. James is Louisiana. Then we will have discussion with questions from our moderator and from attendees. We'll wrap it up and conclude sometime between 8:15 and 8:30 this evening. And so without further ado, I'd love to turn things over to Laura Gardner, who is the chapter chair for the Climate Reality Project, Massachusetts South Coast Chapter. Laura.
Good evening. Thank you, Larry. And I'm so happy all of you are with us tonight. I'm really excited about this program, and I think it's really important. My name is Laura Gardner. I am a mom, I'm a librarian, and I'm also a climate activist. And I've only been a climate activist for 2 years now, but it's so far been very rewarding and exciting, but also very frustrating. And tonight we're going to learn more about plastic and how it is connected to the climate crisis, as well as environmental justice, environmental racism, corporate greed, and of course also pollution, which I see on a daily basis at the beach just 5 blocks from my house here at Fort Phoenix, which is the beach where we did the cleanup on June 12th. And you know, I feel like where this started for me was learning that recycling doesn't actually work. You know, I've been an avid recycler my whole life. And so when I learned that all of those plastic items that I've been putting in my recycling bin so carefully, most of them were not actually being recycled, I felt betrayed. And to find out that I was part of this problem in a big way and was not actually part of the solution, because recycling doesn't actually happen in most cases. Only 9% of plastic ever gets recycled. And it's not because people aren't putting it in bins. It's because there is almost no market for used plastic. It is much cheaper for these companies to make new plastic, and they're making it with fossil fuels, and they are polluting our country, and they're doing it with federal subsidies to the tune of about $12 billion a year. And so having all of these issues connected for me, the issue that you're going to hear about tonight from Mary Lou about all the trash that we've picked up on these beaches and how it just keeps coming. The fact that you're going to hear from Sybil about the ways in which we are trying to break free around the world and the ways that this is affecting countries all over the world negatively. And it's being incinerated in places, our trash, our recycling being incinerated around the world. And then when you hear from Ms. Sharon Levine, recent winner of the Goldman Environmental Prize, about the way that plastic production has poisoned her community, I'm really excited for all of these connections to be made and for you to learn even more about the way that plastic is toxic for our world and the way that we need to break free and how it's completely possible, because this is a convenience that we don't need. This is a short-term product that does not take into account the long-term effects for people and the planet. So I will stop there because I'm excited to get to our panelists, but I'm going to introduce Reverend Jordan Nelson Long, the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Society of Fairhaven, the church that I attend, and I'm excited for her to moderate this discussion.
Good evening, everyone. Like Laura, and probably like everyone here on the panel, I am just so excited to see this conversation happening. Thank you, Laura, for all the leadership work that you have done these past couple years. We, as a church and as a faith, are so excited to have the opportunity to partner with Climate Reality and to work on climate justice. And this conversation fits so neatly with a piece of heartbreak that I think we need to talk about. So to all of you here, I invite you to think about the reason why you decided to say yes on this Wednesday evening to attend this webinar. When you saw the invite come across, wherever you saw it, when you saw it on your email or on Slack or in PR, what led you, and this is rhetorical but real, what led you to sign up? And think about that for a second. And then I want us to go deeper. You know, you obviously had made a decision to care about either one of these issues or one of the people talking about these issues to give us your time. But do you remember what led you to care about this wider conversation? Did something happen? Did you learn something? Did you see something? Have you been trying to work on some piece of this problem, or is there some related problem that is leading you in the direction of thinking about environmental justice, about climate justice, about plastic justice? The answers for those things for me are all yes. I don't primarily identify as a climate activist, although it's certainly part of the umbrella portfolio of global and wider justice that we work on as Unitarian Universalists. But I will tell you, as somebody committed to community outcomes and committed to relational justice, for me, it keeps coming back again and again to what we're doing to the environment. It keeps coming back to extractive vision. It keeps coming back to industrialist vision. It keeps coming back to the idea of our planet as disposable and American style capitalism as really the answer to any question that might need to be asked. And we want to look at that this evening. You know, the words that I said just now may strike fear in your heart even more than talking about plastics or pollution or the ocean. If you start to think that somebody is waging a campaign against capitalism, like, we don't have any mechanism as Americans to sit with that. We're not aware of even how to hold a critique of capitalism. And we don't have to go that broadly into the discussion, but we have to at least identify the wedge issue of corporate profiteering to really talk theologically about climate justice around plastics. And I asked about heartbreak when we began, you know, this analysis of what brought you here. Why are you sitting here ready to listen to this panel? Because I bet you have had a similar experience that I have, and that I know all of these panelists have had, that Laura has had, that we've been dealing with in church, which is something concerns you, you try to do something about it. Maybe it's something like recycling, maybe it's beach cleanup, maybe it's tallying plastic. You're worried, and then you start to get involved and you learn more, and your heart gets broken almost immediately, and you're dealing with this overwhelm, right? And this loss of hope. And Laura was talking about how this process has impacted her and how she felt like she's been betrayed. I had the same feeling on the same issue about recycling. You almost can't go very far in the climate justice arena without discovering this lie about recycling that we've all been fed. And I'm sorry to tell it to you. I know it's heartbreaking, like 90s kids, right? We like grew up with this thing. But what I want you to understand is framing for this conversation is that not only do you feel betrayed when you learn this because you were being betrayed, but because this was a corporate side effort and still is to offload responsibility. And corporations that make plastic and affiliated corporations as well, from the people doing the petrochemical extraction to the refining to the plastic making, they're seeking to offload responsibility by distracting us, by obscuring what happens, where the plastic chain goes and where the waste goes, by minimizing the problem. You just don't have to think about it. And I think in some ways, above all else, by individualizing, by suggesting, which recycling as a family or individual practice does, by suggesting that you can solve this problem. And that not only can you solve this problem, but you must. The responsibility, consumer, lies with you. And if you could just do a better job, if your communities could do a better job, if our middle schoolers could do a better job, we would clean this stuff up. And we never look up at the corporate responsibility. So having painted this concerning question about what corporations are incentivized to do, I also want to tell you something else. Like, it's not coincidental that there is a faith community that is leading this conversation. It's not happenstance that we're supporting climate reality. It's not happenstance that Laura is a member of our church. This is literally part of progressive faith. Our faith calls us to something more than the falsehood of individualizing systemic problems. We believe that we are here to see systems and that we're here to help other people see systems. We also believe that we're here to do power analysis, to call people to recognize that not everyone is impacted equally. Some people have greater safety than others in the way that the world is structured. And 3, we are here to be in solidarity with communities who are put at greater risk. So with that as introduction, I am going to tell you about our fabulous panelists, and then we are going to hand it over to Larry and to our panelists to do some education and conversation. I'm so excited about what we are gonna learn this evening. Our 3 panelists, we have one local, one from the DC area, and one from St. James Parish in Louisiana. Our local panelist may be known to some of you. It's Mary Lou Nicholson from Be the Solution to Pollution. She has for 10 years been leading beach cleanups on the South Coast as a means to clean up, but Mary Lou is an early adopter of this idea that just cleaning it up isn't enough. We have to look above at the structures. And so she's trying to educate the public about the harms of single-use plastic. We also have Sybil Bullock, who is with us from Break Free from Plastic DC, which is a nonprofit advocacy group. Sybil leads the brand audit program, which Mary Lou and others in the community, you may have seen this profiled in the Standard Times. That was where we were out collecting plastic and tallying which brands and then sending them actually back to the manufacturers, which we're really proud of. So Sybil works with that campaign, and she spent some time in coastal New England. She has a BA in anthropology from Connecticut College, as well as a graduate degree in anthropology and development. So welcome, Sybil. And finally, we are so honored to welcome also Ms. Sharon Levine, who was a special education teacher, field after my own heart. And Ms. Levine successfully led a challenge, think about this, y'all, a challenge to the construction of a $1.25 billion plastic manufacturing plant. So, you know, think about all of the structures and arguments against anyone getting in the way of that construction. You're gonna hurt jobs, you're gonna hurt the community. Ms. Levine was able to frame the argument differently, and we're going to get to hear about that. And it was really important to her. St. James Parish is her community and already has identified cancer clusters from the variety of refining, production, other petrochemical-based activities that have been going on there for literally decades. So Ms. Levine was able to organize protests, educate her fellow community members, and mobilize really successful grassroots opposition. And for that work, she won a Goldman Foundation Award, which is basically, it means that you are a rock star in the field of environmental justice. So we are just so honored. Thanks for being here. Thanks to all of our panelists. And I will hand it over at this point.
Hello, everyone. Mary Lou Nicholson. So the first slide will begin the story of when I started the group. There it is, 10 years ago. Someone asked me to come to this beach. And when I arrived, as you can see, I was overwhelmed. And I thought, okay, I'm just starting this cleanup group. What am I supposed to do? This is unbelievable. But I did get volunteers and they did help me. And for 10 years, I've been cleaning beaches around the South Coast with wonderful volunteers. I got such great people that helped me. So I want to give you an update from the video at the beginning. The number, I actually missed a sheet, so it's actually more than was in the video. So the total amount of trash collected thus far by our group, Be the Solution to Pollution, is 16,266 pounds. And again, a lot of that, most of that is light plastic. But the beach that we keep returning to is the beach where I started, and that's this Fort Phoenix in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. In fact, we have cleaned this beach 45 times, at least. I've come back with other groups as well. So the amount of trash that we picked up at this beach, this one little spot, it's not huge for any of the volunteers that are on, you know it's so small. 10,261 pounds. So wrap your brain around that. It's light plastic. So it carries easily on the water. And honestly, I could stand there after a cleanup and just watch it come in on the water. And it is heartbreaking. Can we see the next slide, please? There it is. And so for all but 2020, every year we've collected data at least once a year. And this is an Ocean Conservancy sheet. So it gives you an idea of everything. People, the wonderful volunteers will pick up each piece of trash and write it on the data sheets. And they just do it, they're wonderful, and we get an accurate number that way. So the top five types of debris that we've picked up always, this is the order: cigarette filters, beverage bottles, food wrappers, bottle caps, straws, and stirrers. And cigarette filters are always number one. Although in the Ocean Conservancy cleanup for the world last year, snack wrappers beat out cigarette butts, if you can imagine the pandemic. Anyway, people had individual servings. But so the thing is, cigarette filters are always number one, and the filters are in fact made from cellulose acetate fiber. Ta-da! Plastic, right? More plastic. A lot of people don't know that, and I have to explain that to them. They're like, oh, what's the big deal? It's biodegradable, just leave it. No. Next slide, please. So obviously, like I said, the plastic just keeps coming back. Next slide, please. So we went from 2011, 2012, 2013. Are you seeing a pattern? 2014, next slide. So there's no way to clean all of this. There's microplastics, there's microfibers, there's microbeads. It's impossible. But for me, so this, the best analogy I've ever heard anybody say is, it's like an overflowing tub. The water is spilling over the top, and you come in with a sponge and you're trying to fix the problem, mop up all that water. It's not going to work. So I use these beach cleanups to tell people, to teach them, to show them what the problem is, and to bring it back to the producers who are putting it out there, and they need to take responsibility. So it'll continue to come back. Single-use plastic will keep coming in until we push back on those manufacturers. And that is my aim. Next slide, please. For these people, these young people, and all, everybody, honestly, but the kids just have my heart, and that's why I started the group. I care about their future. So I'll keep fighting. And that's why, next slide, please. That's why I decided to do the Break Free from Plastic audit. I think it's fantastic. It tells you exactly what's out there. I love, marking down, taking a picture, and calling out these brands. They push this stuff constantly. Oh, we got the new and improved, this, that, the other things. You use it once and it goes away. Truth is, it never goes away. So we're going to keep doing these things. This is our brand audit total. We picked up 408 pounds of trash that day. And a lot of the things, the brands had worn off because of the environment, had worn down the labels, but these are the ones we identified. And so the number one was Dunkin' Donuts. They're my nemesis. I can spot a Dunkin' Donuts straw a mile away. Nestle and PepsiCo. And the brand audit was, so eye-opening when you do this brand audit. And I hope a lot of people do. You can even do it in your own home, around your home, small ones. You click into this sheet and it shows you who the parent company is. It was fascinating. I felt like a detective, very empowering. So we separated the plastics, and the top 3 polluters, we mailed those back to their corporate offices, because honestly, it's about time they started taking care of the mess that they created. And I must say that it was highly satisfying just sending it off. And I got so many messages from people saying, oh, because we were in the paper, and, so people heard about it, and I was getting messages saying, I always wanted to do that. When are you going to do it again? I want to join. I want to do this. So we will be doing it again. I know I'll be, our group's going to do it in August. And, I'm excited. We've got to call them out and make them responsible. So I'm going to keep doing this, and I'm going to keep connecting the plastic to what it should be. My 61 brain is getting stuck. But anyway, climate change, environmental justice, plastic in the ocean. I'm going to keep calling out these issues. That is my goal. That is my mission, and that's what I'm going to keep doing. And for every cleanup, I'm going to tag those brands and put it out on social media. So I encourage young people and those who care about young people to speak out, demand corporate responsibility. I mean, squeaky wheel, if we're all, demanding that things change, I have hope, because I have to have hope that things will. So thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Mary Lou, for all your incredible work. And it's really really warms my heart getting to hear directly from a brand audit leader and some of the participants who are here in today's event. I thought of this during the opening remarks from Reverend Jordan about this kind of toxic shift towards individualization. And I think what you're all doing through organizing these brand audits and through organizing events like this is kind of shifting towards communitization, if I can just make up a word, because we can really find a lot of strength and grow our power in investing in our communities and taking collective action to challenge systems of oppression, such as what we're seeing with the plastics crisis and the climate crisis. So yeah, communitization, there we go. So bravo to all the amazing work you've done, Mary Lou, and I'm very excited to be with you all here today. My name is Sybil. I'm with the Break Free from Plastic movement, and I'm happy to just start off by sharing a little bit more about the Break Free from Plastic movement and then go into the rest of the presentation. So just to share, the Break Free from Plastic movement is a global movement working together to envision a future free from plastic pollution. I think we can all get behind that. It was launched in 2016 in Asia, and since then it has spread to more than 11,000 organizations and individuals around the world, now in 161 countries. Our members share the common values of environmental protection and social justice and work together through a holistic approach to bring about systemic change. So this really means tackling plastic pollution across the whole plastics value chain, from the extraction of fossil fuels all the way to disposal, and really focusing on systems change, reductions in single-use plastic production, and pushing for long-term solutions. Next slide, please. So today it's my great pleasure to talk about why companies are responsible for plastic pollution and climate change. Next slide, please. So just a quick outline, and I'll try to stick to time because I could talk about this forever. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about, but I thought it would help to kind of start with the real story of plastic pollution, kind of addressing that heartbreak that a lot of us have experienced, myself included, and hear the story that industry has not been telling us, and looking at the roles of companies in that story. Then I thought it would help to kind of distinguish between false solutions and real solutions, and then bring in the Brand Audit Initiative, which some of you who've already participated are experts now in how to do a brand audit. That's my role at Break Free from Plastic, is coordinating this project globally. And I thought it would be cool to end on kind of sharing why these brand audits really matter and what we have already achieved with them, showing some really great examples and hopefully inspiring you to take your brand audits to the next level in various creative ways. So let's get started. Next slide. So it goes without saying, perhaps folks here are already well aware that the plastic pollution crisis and the climate crisis are the same crisis. 99% of plastics, are made from fossil fuels, and at every single step along their life cycle, plastics are contributing to climate change. So while many of us started becoming engaged and concerned about the issue by seeing plastics as waste, plastic litter in the environment, kind of at the final stage, this is for many of us where the heartbreak started happening, right? Seeing the straw up the turtle's nose and plastic bags inside the stomach of whales. But actually, the further upstream we look, the more heartbreak we experience, because there are really toxic impacts at every stage along the life cycle. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that plastic is not only a litter and waste problem. Plastic waste entering the environment is only one problem of a much larger story of environmental and social injustice. And so just to quickly take you along a few different points along the life cycle, at the beginning, at the level of extraction, we know plastics made from fossil fuels, which of course risk oil spills, groundwater contamination, and contributes to the climate crisis. At the level of production, which Sharon will tell you more about as this is happening in her community, plastic factories tend to be located in marginalized low-income communities who bear the greatest risk of disease resulting from exposure to these plastic byproduct pollutants. So it really is a social justice crisis. At the level of consumption, plastics and the toxic chemicals that are added to plastics leak into the products that we buy, such as our food, our water, and ultimately entering our bodies. And there's been really terrifying research that has come out recently looking at how this is actually impacting human fertility in a really detrimental way. And finally, of course, at the level of disposal, we have learned that about an estimated 8 million tons of plastic waste enters the oceans every year, and only 9% of all plastic ever produced since the 1950s has actually been recycled. And as all this plastic lies in landfills or washed up on beaches, it releases greenhouse gases known to exacerbate climate change. So while initiatives like cleanups that focus on the end of life cycle of plastic and other waste items are important, they alone will not solve the plastic problem. And so by doing what Mary Lou did and adding a brand audit, by collecting data and making it more of a long-term approach, by using that data to leverage systemic change, that really helps us to move upstream and tackle the problem at the source. Next slide, please. So this graphic is from a new report that just came out by Planet Tracker. It's looking at unwrapping investor risks regarding the plastic industry. And it's really a revolutionary report because we can see, moving from the left to the right, the fossil fuel companies that then directly source and sell and partner with these intermediary packaging companies that then sell directly to the well-known brands that you're all finding in your brand audit report, those fast-moving consumer goods brands, the Coca-Colas and Nestle's and Unilevers. So it's really important to recognize that not only are these crises interlinked, but they're driven by the same exact companies. When you look upstream, a lot of the industry is actually quite vertically integrated, with plastic companies owning fossil fuel companies and vice versa. And so if we move to the next slide, actually, if you look to the graph on the left here, with the steep rise in plastic production that's projected, this is really the lifeline of the fossil fuel industry, with many sectors decarbonizing, which is great. The fossil fuel industry is panicking, and they're really grasping onto plastics as their plan B to keep their industry afloat and keep the money flowing. So plastic is really driven by supply rather than demand, because as demand for oil is dropping in many industries, they're really pushing plastics into the market to replace that lost revenue. And so you can see in the center that about 8% of the world's oil production is used to make plastic. And again, as the industry is really clinging to plastic production to keep their money flowing in, this figure is projected to actually increase to 20% by the year 2050. And this is really bad news, because greenhouse gas emissions from the plastic life cycle really threatens the ability of the global community to keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So if the projections continue as projected. We're looking at greenhouse gas emissions from plastic reaching over 56 gigatons by 2050, which would be 10 to 13% of the entire remaining carbon budget. So you can learn more about this in the Center for International Environmental Law's Climate and Plastics report, if you want to learn more. But this is crazy, right? We're really undermining the future of climate, and all this to make single-use plastic packaging, right? You can see in the final graph on the right that 40% of all the plastics produced each year is for packaging. So it's really just used once for a matter of a few minutes, sometimes even seconds, and then discarded. So our future is not disposable, and the risk cost benefit analysis here just makes zero sense. Next slide, please. So what we've been noticing from a lot of the very companies who have gotten us into this mess in the first place is that they've been pushing false solutions on us. So to begin, this was something I wanted to share given the opening remarks. So many of us grew up with this story, right, of being told that it's our responsibility, our duty to recycle. And I'm right there with you. I was very heartbroken when I learned about how broken the recycling system is. But so I wanted to kind of contextualize where this all kind of started. Some of you may remember the Keep America Beautiful campaign. So if we go back in time quickly to the 1950s, end of World War II, plastics was really starting to enter the market after being initially used for soldiers, actually. The material was used for things like plexiglass and ration packaging at the beginning. And so this is really when the industry started and it really expanded. And after the war, the industry needed a new market. So this is really when it expanded. And within just a few years, groups were already pushing back and saying, we don't want this. This stuff is crazy. The pushback against plastic has been happening for a long time. And the industry put together this great campaign that we're still kind of working to undo the damage it caused of their famous slogan, people start pollution and people can stop it, with the image of a crying Native American who was actually an Italian actor. It was all very strange. But we've sort of internalized this idea that, oh, there's so much that I'm not in control of. And I think we see this a lot with the climate crisis. We can feel so helpless and so powerless because a lot of us don't necessarily have a way of holding climate change. We don't have many of us don't have a pipeline running through our backyards, but we do interact tangibly with plastic all the time. So it's something that makes us feel powerful. However, this has been really misleading. And so at this point, we can claim that was really the beginning of the false solutions tactic that companies have been pushing on us now for years. So to quickly define a false solution, it's essentially anything that is claimed to be part of the solution, but it does not actually address the root cause of the issue. So a few examples, we see this all the time. Number one, switching to other disposable single-use materials like paper. You might think, oh, that's better than plastic, at least it's not fossil fuels. But this is going to be impacting our forests, which are also really important in the fight against a warming climate, as our carbon sinks, as you know, the way our climate can be regenerated. So we don't want to be putting added pressure on forests either, and really deflecting our addiction to single use onto forest systems. We also see a false solution popping up with all of the bioplastics, compostable plastics. And again, prepare yourself for more heartbreak because there is a lot of greenwashing that's happening in this trend. To quickly kind of explain, bio-based plastic refers to, yep, greenwashing, exactly. Plastics that are made from plant materials such as corn or sugarcane, but these currently represent only 1% of the plastics available on the market. Another in this category is biodegradable plastic. And for these, you need really specific heat and humidity conditions, which are rarely, if ever, met in the natural environment. And so this also poses a problem. And compostable plastics need to be composted most of the time in high heat industrial facilities. So again, there's a lot of confusion for consumers out there. And again, it's just the greenwashing is becoming ever more sophisticated and ever more difficult to keep up with. And finally, continuing to rely on recycling alone without a reduction is a really clever industry tactic to make consumers feel good, kind of playing into that, oh, I've done my duty, I've put my item in the recycling bin. But as you'll see in that link I shared previously in the chat, a report that came out last year, looking at the US specifically, exposed that only plastics 1 and 2 are actually being recycled in the US. They surveyed all material recovery facilities across the country. And so anything outside of 1 and 2 in most states, I'm sure there are perhaps some exceptions, are not actually being recycled. So we can't just keep relying on recycling as the magic solution. We wish it were. We so badly want to believe it, but it's just not working. And furthermore, it's just enabling companies to continue extracting more fossil fuels to manufacture more single-use packaging and keep on business as usual. But we really just can't afford more business as usual. Next slide, please. So I'm really happy to share, actually, if you want to learn more about false solutions, we have a brand new report that just came out, really examining hundreds of solutions projects that companies have put forward. And unfortunately, coming to the sad conclusion that most of the solutions that they are putting forward, the Coca-Colas, the Unilevers, the Procter & Gamble's of the world, they're really failing on presenting us with more false solutions that don't actually address the plastics production crisis. So we see a lot of the same pushing out false narratives. So I'll share the link in the chat, and I encourage you to check it out. It is really a groundbreaking report that I hope you enjoy and learn from. Next slide, please. But the good news is there are real solutions, and they are easy, and they have existed for a very long time. So like I said before, plastic really only started entering our world in the 1950s. We have survived for a very, very long time without them. And so it's nothing fancy, nothing sexy, nothing, high tech, just simple refill and reuse and alternative delivery systems. So how to know a real solution from a false solution? A real solution must involve a reduction in the production of single-use plastic altogether. I can share a really great little sheet that can help you assess, is this false or real solutions, in the chat later. But the essential solutions that the Breakthrough from Plastic movement globally has agreed on are reductions in plastic production and investing in alternative delivery systems and reuse and refill models. So a water fountain, for example, over water bottles, as a classic example. And so, yeah, just on a final note there, this is not that much to ask. A world without plastic pollution is not only possible, it already exists in many parts of the world, in many communities. And again, it really relies on the power of communities to demand those changes. So in our shift towards communitization, I think we can get there together. So let's move on and talk about brand audits, where this came from and how it fits into this whole story. So brand audits are essentially taking litter cleanups to the next level by documenting the brands that you find on plastic waste collected at cleanup. So as some of you know who've done your own brand audits, this helps us identify the companies that are responsible for plastic pollution, because we know that no matter how much we can try doing our very best as individuals to reduce buying plastic and recycling whenever we can, whatever we can, this will sadly never be enough if we continue to act as individuals alone rather than challenging the systemic reasons that we got into this crisis in the first place. So to really solve the plastic problem, we're using the data collected at these global brand audits to call on the companies that appear as our top 10 polluters to stop producing so much unnecessary single-use plastic in the first place. And we instead urge them to move towards those real solutions we talked about that eliminate the need for single-use plastic packaging altogether. And that's really where the brand audits come in. It's a great tool for communities to use to take matters into your own hands and use the data to create solutions using the data locally that can be used to leverage and influence local stakeholders, local politicians, local decision makers. So we've been doing this every year since 2018. Thousands of members from all over the world. Last year, we actually broke a record. We had 55 countries participate, despite being in a global pandemic. So really humbled and amazed by the amazing leaders that are part of this movement. And every year we've analyzed the data and published our annual brand audit report. And so check them out. I'll share the link in the chat if you haven't seen them before. But if you participate in a brand audit this year and submit your data, you too will be part of this global report, which is a huge tool to naming and shaming those top polluters. Next slide, please. So essentially the three main goals with the brand audits that we have are, number one, to shift the narrative or change the story, right? Changing it away from blaming individuals for not being good enough at recycling and really shifting it towards putting the responsibility back towards the companies that are making billions of dollars from their continued reliance on single-use plastic. And they have the funds and the research design teams to innovate their way out of this problem and invest in alternative ways of delivering their products to people. Two, we're using the data and the associated reports and campaigns to hold those companies accountable. And of course, number three, we're building a global movement. Invite you to join us at breakfreefromplastic.org. And together we're really growing our strength and uniting diverse perspectives from global north, global south, from all sorts of different communities is really key to how we grow our power. Next slide, please. So while the brand audit is still only a few years old, we've already seen some really exciting impacts. We've gotten international coverage in big outlets like The Guardian, CNN, BBC, and others who've written about the report and amplified the call to hold corporations accountable. And this has really started to influence the dominant plastics narrative, which is a huge first step. We've also seen some of our members use their brand audit data to pass bans on single-use plastic, create zero-waste communities, and even file lawsuits against some of those top polluters. And this is really important. We have seen some of those top polluting companies even announce new sustainability commitments, which is a really big step in the right direction. But unfortunately, these commitments are still not ambitious enough, which is why our work with the brand audit continues. So just to spotlight a few amazing examples from the last year, and then I'll wrap up my time with you. Here we've got the group from Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida, led by the amazing Alex Gordon, who is only a junior in college, and she succeeded in convincing the campus president to sign the plastic-free campus pledge. So she conducted brand audits with her sustainability team on campus for several years in a row, and then used the data to show to influence the school's administration. And so they're one of our very first US campuses to go plastic free and eliminate plastics. They're on a important coastal environment, and a lot of their school is really focused on marine science and environmental studies. So this was, a natural fit. And now the school has had such a success that the city of St. Petersburg has started to take lessons from them. And now it's spread to the city. The town hall is now going plastic free as well. And so the students have really taken on an incredible leadership role and had this impact spread to St. Petersburg. Next slide, please. Next, we've seen just 2 months ago, a group in the Philippines called Interfacing Development Interventions for Sustainability conduct brand audits on the island of Mindanao, and they use their data to push for a vote in favor of banning single-use plastics on their island. So they used the data to generate a lot of media attention, and it put enough pressure on the city council to pass this single-use plastic ban. So this is some great news, just happened recently. So you too can do something similar. If there's any laws that you're hoping your elected officials can vote in favor of or against. And finally, last but not least, in the span of 1 week, we saw 2 members of the Break Free movement in the US file lawsuits, pretty high profile lawsuits against Coca-Cola and other of the top polluting companies, essentially for false advertising and misleading claims. They have all sorts of nice advertisements about how Coca-Cola is creating a world without waste and all these claims about circularity and recyclability. So these groups actually used the data from the global brand audits to show, to inform the lawsuit, among other kinds of evidence that this is nonsense, and they're suing Coca-Cola. So to wrap up, last slide, please. There are many, many amazing ways to use the data to push for longer term change in a systemic way. So I highly encourage you and I warmly invite you to sign up and join us. You can learn everything else you need to know about brand audits by going to the link here and signing up. We've got trainings, we've got resources, all sorts of ways to support you. So I hope you think about joining us and doing a brand audit this summer in your community. Last slide, just thank you very much, and feel free to, I think there's just one last slide. Okay, that's it. So thanks again so much for your time and for inviting me here. Really looking forward to the next part of the panel.
I have too much to lose just for a chemical plant to come in. And a few years later, I'm diagnosed with some cancer, God forbid, or something, and then I'm gone. What's left for my son? Why leave him in this filth? I don't want my parish to be known as Cancer Airless. I want them to feel proud to say, just like I am, I'm from St. James. It's a $9.4 billion industry that's coming up not even 2 miles from my house. If I have to walk out there with a picket sign, I will.
St. James is different because of the sheer size of the facilities that are moving in. What's also different is how transparent their intent to wipe the Black community out is. It is obvious. Usually it's a little bit slower, and maybe it happens over decades. In this case, there's a superhighway to destruction.
This is St. James, Louisiana, a community on the banks of the Mississippi River that's surrounded by chemical plants and pipelines. It's part of an 85-mile stretch that has come to be known as Cancer Alley because of the elevated rates of cancer here. The plants mostly make plastics, things like grocery bags, polyester clothing, plastic bottles, and playground equipment. St. James is also the final planned section of the Dakota Access Pipeline, the same one that crosses through the Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota. As these industries have moved into the community, they bought out some of the owners of the sugarcane plantations that have long dominated these riverbanks. Many of those left are Black, low income, and stuck amid these plastic-making factories. For years, residents didn't realize the potential effects that these plants might have on their health and livelihoods. But some in the community are waking up.
Justice is mine. Justice is mine.
One is Chastity White, who has lived in St. James her entire life.
If you ride along this Highway 18, you would see it's really bad. We loaded with chemical plants along this river road from one end to the other, and it's not just one or two here. No, they're putting 4, 5, 6, 7 in one spot, and most of the chemical plants are in African American communities.
Chastity's former high school, located just a few doors down from her home, was recently sold for $10.1 million to a chemical manufacturer. A replacement high school opened, but it's 10 miles away in a neighboring district. But that project pales in comparison to the so-called Sunshine Project being planned a few miles up the road. The Taiwanese plastics manufacturer Formosa is getting ready to build a $9.4 billion chemical complex. Nearby, the Bayou Bridge pipeline is being put in by Energy Transfer Partners.
This, not just the same company, but it is the same pipeline. So it starts in North Dakota, an indigenous land, and ends here in St. James Parish in an area that includes a free town, which was founded by newly emancipated slaves.
This is Ann Rolfes. She's the executive director of the Louisiana Bucket Brigade, a group that works with communities to stop petrochemical pollution.
You know, St. James is the living example of environmental racism. The parish is about 50-50 black and white. This district, where we are, is 87% African American. It's the highest percentage of African Americans in the parish. And where are they putting all the facilities? In this district, right? Environmental racism means you put things where black and brown people live. You put pollution where black and brown people live.
This is not just an issue in Louisiana. Studies show that African Americans face disproportionate rates of lead poisoning and asthma and are more likely to live in places with polluted air. Let's take Chester, Pennsylvania, for example. The city is 75% black. It's home to one of the largest trash burning plants in the country. It also has triple the rate of asthma, a 24% higher rate of lung cancer, and a 64% higher rate of ovarian cancer than the rest of Pennsylvania. And remember Flint? The predominantly black Michigan city had poisoned water coming through its pipes as a result of state officials trying to save money. People there are still drinking bottled water. The federal government actually has an Office of Environmental Justice, though President Trump has proposed cutting it from the federal budget. George H.W. Bush's administration formed it, initially as the Office of Environmental Equity. Evidence had emerged that air pollution, lead, and hazardous materials had a disproportionate effect on the poor and communities of color.
Too often, the poor and powerless are taken advantage of, not only by the polluters, but also by the policymakers, and it's time to put this to an end.
This office provides grants to communities to help address environmental and public health problems. In some cases, it's worked, but it hasn't stopped polluters from coming to places like St. James.
How are political interests aligned with the interests of the factories?
What's interesting is that you have a lot of the same dynamics at play now that you had back during the plantation days. So during the plantation days, the plantation owners needed access to the river, which we've got here. They needed big tracts of land, which industry today also needs. And in both cases, they needed a compliant political system. So then obviously our state facilitated slavery and allowed it. And these days, our state facilitates the siting of these polluting plants in black neighborhoods. There's no way that industries could do it if they did not have the assistance of our state.
A state representative sent us a statement about the benefits of these industries. Process industries are one of the key industry sectors for growing and sustaining Louisiana's economy, and chemical manufacturers and refineries have been attracted to numerous locations in Louisiana. Our state's advantages in workforce talent, infrastructure, and available natural resources have led many international companies in this sector to establish or expand operations along the Mississippi River and in southwest Louisiana. A spokesperson from Formosa confirmed that the company worked with the state's economic development arm to select the St. James site. The community's proximity to the river and area pipelines also enticed them. But many of the community members don't feel this economic boom. They feel the effects of the chemicals in their health and everyday life.
What does it smell like?
Sometimes it smells like ammonia. Sometimes it smells like rotten egg. Sometimes it's just a smell that you just can't describe.
I wasn't there long, but I smelled it too. People in our crew complained of headaches and lightheadedness. I went to talk with Sharon Levine, who lives in the shadows of some of these plants.
We have so many people with cancer. We just buried a friend of mine 2 weeks ago with colon cancer. I have a friend of mine that died with an upper respiratory infection. His name was Keith. I have his picture in the house. Whenever I go to March, I bring his picture. And then my grandson went to the doctor Monday because he couldn't breathe. He's 6 years old, Elijah. He couldn't breathe. When I was a little girl, I didn't have any sickness, nothing at all. We didn't have industry back then. My daddy raised our foods. He raised our vegetables, animals, and everything. We ate from the land. We always had fresh vegetables and fresh meat. And now we don't have anyone to raise anything because the industry is killing it.
Sharon's friend Irma Smith used to work in a plant and has survived cancer. But now she finds herself with terrible respiratory issues.
I have worked in the plant. I'm a cancer patient, a breast cancer patient. And with cancer, they heal some, but their body never heal. God gonna help us because we got enough around here, not just sinus that people feel from these plant and things. Your eyes be burning. You wonder why your eyes are red. Why should these people come from all over to build over in our community?
According to the EPA, St. James and the surrounding areas do have elevated cancer risks. Still, it's been difficult for those from this part of Louisiana to prove that their sickness is linked to pollution.
You can go from house to house. This one has cancer, that one has cancer, there's a different form of cancer right there. And so it's anecdotal. And the industry tries to say, oh, well, you have no studies, you have no information. But we're relying on people's observation. And what is the first step of the scientific process? It's observation. So if there were any real interest in understanding what was happening around here, our state and industry would be seizing upon people's observations and trying to find out more.
State officials told us that all of Louisiana is in compliance with national air quality standards. The state also emphasizes the jobs that these industries bring.
And we're talking about 9,200 permanent jobs associated with this project. We don't talk numbers like this very often in Louisiana.
One of the big things that these plants say and the politicians who support the industry will say is that this brings jobs to the community.
They won't give it to us.
Chastity and others have told us that those who come in and build these pipelines and plants usually have license plates from out of state. And for rent signs dot the sides of the road, offering short-term housing to those who come and build. Sharon started a group called Rise St. James to raise awareness about proposed industrial projects. They educate the community on how to report smells and pollution, and they're working to stop plants like Formosa.
They would come to the meeting and tell us, this industry is coming in, this one coming in. And I would get more mad and madder inside. I would go home and cry sometimes. And I said, dear Lord, how can we fight this? And so that's why we came up with Rise. And we're gonna rise. I know it. And I just feel it, the plane is not coming.
Sharon's brother Milton has lived in St. James his entire life, but he says that it took a long time for him to realize how problematic the industry is.
When I was working for Shell in the 80s, I was told that from Baton Rouge to Old New Orleans was Cancer Alley, and didn't really appeal to me at that time, but now I understand it better, that what it is doing to the people that live here. And the majority of the people that are being affected in our area are blacks, because all the majority of the whites have left. They have paid them well for their property, and they move out and live somewhere else. We're fighting big cats, not little cats.
Look, this is all pretty depressing, but one thing that we always turn to is that in this part of the world, along the Mississippi River, is the largest slave revolt in U.S. history. And the way that we think about it is, you know, the challenge of taking apart slavery was much greater even than facing these billion-dollar companies. And they won, ultimately, right? And we're gonna win, ultimately. We know we don't know how that's gonna happen, but bigger things have been beaten.
Justice is mine. Justice today is mine. I told Satan, get deep behind. Justice today is mine.
Sharon, I don't know if you have things you want to add, but the floor is yours.
Oh my God, it was so wonderful to see us again. And Sybil had such a wonderful presentation all about that plastic, how we drinking plastics. Well, I know we drinking because the chemicals that make plastic is cancer causing. So we're still getting it in our bodies. We get that cancer all kind of ways, in the air, in the water, in the salt, in the plastics. So I would like to say that we started fighting Wan Wan. Wan Wan was trying to come into St. James Parish, and RISE had not been started yet. So we had a march on September 8th, 2018. We went to parish council meetings. We wrote letters to the parish council to tell them that we didn't want Wan Wan to come in, because we already had 9 industries in the 4th district. We have 12 in the 5th district within a 10-mile radius. We have big storage tanks of oil, gas. And then after we defeated Wan Wan by speaking up, we did not let that rest. We didn't want any more in here. And we made it known. We gave a march and we spoke out. Then we gave another march after we formed RISE. We gave the march on November 3rd, 2018. We formed March in October. On that 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, we had a march because we were tired and we spoke out. You have to speak out. Tell your public officials that you're not going to take anymore. And we meant we're not going to take anymore. And we were ready to tell our story. And people listened to us. They heard our cry for help. And when Wan Wan tried to come in, they didn't have all their facts together. They didn't even have an office. So we did our research and we found out things that the parish council didn't try to find out. So we did those things. We brought it to the parish council. To our surprise, the parish council listened because they didn't have a choice, because these people didn't have a legitimate business. Like, they didn't have a place where they can call their office. And so the community spoke out. I was surprised and I was glad, I was happy. And then in 2019, September 2019, the parish council told them no, and they pulled out. So that was our victory, the first victory. And then after that, RISE St. James had a march. In our second march was a 5-day march, like May something to June 2nd or 3rd or whatever. And that was a 5-day march from La Place to Baton Rouge to speak to the governor. He wouldn't come out to speak with us, but we still did live stream in the office, in the outer office. And he told us to get an appointment and he would call. He would let us come and see him. That never materialized. We tried to get an appointment, but that didn't happen. And then we started to write letters to the governor to stop Formosa. Formosa had not been approved yet by our parish council members. And then we kept on writing letters, kept on talking and speaking out. And then 2019 in January, our parish council did not listen to us and they approved Formosa Plastics to come in. We just stopped one, that was a plastic facility. We stopped that one. Then now we're still trying to stop Formosa Plastics, and they are still trying to come in. But as long as we have RISE St. James and we have the community on our side, we have people power. So we're going to stop Formosa Plastics. The judge ruled in our favor that they cannot construct right now because their permit had to go back to the Army Corps of Engineers to be re-evaluated. So that's one of the holdups right there. So as of now, there's no construction going on the property. The citizens of St. James are watching the property. They're watching to see if they're going to construct. And whenever they do, we have to alert our attorneys. So they are not going to construct because we are not going to allow it. We have enough plastics, just like Sybil said. When I was little, we didn't need plastic. We had bottles for our babies when we had babies. We had to warm our bottle with the milk.
So we don't need a plastic bottle. When we bought milk from the milkman, it came in a a glass jug, a gallon jug. And we survived. We were healthy. We didn't have problems. Now everything is plastics and it's killing us. We have to get away from all of this plastic. I'm trying, slow but sure, but I'm trying. I don't drink out of the plastic bottles. I have a canteen that I would bring with me when I go somewhere. That's what I use. And whenever we have a function, we're trying to find forks, utensils to use that's not plastic. We as a people, as a world, we have to get away from all this plastic. Go back to the old days. It's going to take a big turn for us to come from plastic to go back to the way it was when we were healthy. We were healthy back then, just like I said, we were not sick. We didn't have to go to the doctor for cancer, for high blood pressure, for diabetes. We didn't have those things. Now we have everything. When I found out I had autoimmune hepatitis, I did my research and it came from industrial pollutants. So what will it take for us, America, to wake up and stop all of this plastics? If we want to live, we need to get away from all this plastics. It's causing sicknesses, it's causing cancer, it's causing illness. The chemical plants that right here in St. James in this 10-mile radius, you drive down and you can see the emissions that's coming out those big pipes. I've taken pictures of those emissions, sent it to a friend of mine and she's doing a video. So we're trying whatever we can to live. All we want to do is live, breathe clean air, drink clean water, and go back to making a garden again. That's all we're asking for. I don't think that's too much to ask to want to live. That's what Rise St. James is about, to protect the economy, to keep us well, to stop breathing this bad air. Just like Chastity said, smell like a rotten egg, smell like chemicals. Sometimes, you can't even describe it. When I would get up in the morning to go to work, when I opened my door at 6:30 in the morning, you could smell it. It would smell so bad, it would want to knock you out. That's how bad it is. We breathe this every day. And someone coming to St. James for the first time, stay here for 2 hours and you will breathe that same air. You might have a headache and you will call us back and tell us how you feel. We have had people to call back and tell us how they feel after they left from St. James. It's like Rise, we are fighting for our lives. And we don't want any more chemical plants, any more plastic plants in St. James. So this one, we're going to stop it. We don't need all this plastic. So that's our fight, to live. Our fight is to live. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you for your work and thank you for your witness here. It reminds me of my colleague, Elizabeth Wynn, who is really active in leading immigrant justice mission work in our faith and nationally. And she's the daughter of a refugee from Vietnam. And what she says from growing up in Youngstown and being surrounded by both the Vietnamese community and then her American community, what she says is, for some of us, this is family. For some of us, it's family. And I think that is inevitably true with environmental justice also. It's a fight to live, and for some of us, it's family, and we've got to extend that sense of being connected so that we can be in solidarity, which actually gets to this question that is posted in the Q&A, naming that BIPOC people, people of color, are more likely to be directly and particularly harmfully impacted, as we've heard and seen throughout these presentations and videos. That's real. And it's not because of some inherent sensitivity that the African community has, African American community. It's because we are locating these plants, we are poisoning water, we are harming the land where people of color live. Even the way we talk about this is so attenuated, like it just magically happens, as opposed to the action is being taken to cite things in communities. what I would say about this piece, and then I'm going to say a little bit more about how we're going to go forward, just looking at the time, because it is 8:21 and we told people that we would be out of here at 8:30. What I would say to that question about how do we get BIPOC folks involved on the South Coast is that for some of us, it's family needs to start with us, and what we need to do wherever we identify ethnically, racially, is look at how we're impacted by this. We are all impacted, and then listen to the calls for solidarity that we have. You know, it's not my job to tell people of color in New Bedford, you need to care about this, you need to be engaged in this. But it is my job to listen for where we're invited to move our bodies and our voices and witness and be in solidarity. And we actually have been invited into just that process around Parallel Products. You may have seen in the chat that I mentioned the name of that company. You might do a quick Google and see what that is. It does have to do with some plastics, but it is larger waste incineration, things that can't be recycled, for example. And it's the community of color in New Bedford that is saying, help us. We need to have this struggle be more front and center. We don't want this to happen. It's being cited in our community. And it's going to impact all of us, right? For some of us, it's family. For all of us, we breathe the air. So I think the answer is solidarity, but we can definitely have a wider conversation about that and should. And in that spirit of wider conversation, the other thing that I want to name, just looking at time, is that it is part of white capitalist culture to believe that we can package this kind of conversation and have, like, you know, a one-time webinar and we'll get these amazing panelists, which we did, and hear this really great information, which we did, and then check boxes. We will immediately know how to solve this problem and we can move on to talking about the next problem. Here's the news. That isn't going to work. And there is no next problem, in that part of what we've been trying to highlight is that all of these oppressions that we work on, everything that you're concerned about, it's all connected. We have to keep having this conversation, and we have to have it not as a one and done, but as a deepening into relationship. And so what I have to say at this time, looking at the clock, is we're almost done here, but we're not done here. This is the beginning. Not the middle, not the end. We're going to continue delving in on this issue out loud in this forum, as well as in other ways. We're going to stay in touch with these activists. We're going to be brought into relationship with other activists we don't even know the names of yet. We are here for the struggle because for all of us, it's family. So thank you so much to everybody for sharing your wisdom. And I'm just going to ask one question instead of the whole set of questions that we thought that we might ask. And if you're willing, we would love to have all of you back as we move into this next year. So we'll be in dialogue about that. But the question I would ask, kind of a combination of a couple, it arises in part, like my 14-year-old is here, we're traveling together, and he was listening and he said, what's this about? And I said, you know, you hear, what do you think it's about? And he said, plastic pollution. And I said, yeah. You look tired. And he said, I just hate talking about this. And I just kind of stared at him and he said, it's so much worse than global warming. And I just kind of said, go on. And he said, with global warming, it's really overwhelming, but everyone knows it's a problem and people are willing to talk about it like it's a problem. With plastic pollution, nobody wants to talk about it. So I feel so hopeless. So I think he really was onto something. My question for all of you as panelists is, for somebody really wanting to start getting involved in some way, what advice or thought or next move would you suggest, knowing that we all live in different communities and are impacted in different ways? And then the second part of this is, how do you suggest that people maintain hope, knowing that there's going to be a constant challenge intentionally, right? Like companies, culture, despair, like don't even try to fix this. It's probably pointless. And we feel how we feel moving through the world. Sometimes we feel discouraged for all kinds of reasons. So what would you suggest as a way to just get started, and how do you maintain hope? And then we'll hand it to Laura for some really concrete next steps and we'll be on our way. Sharon, can we start with you?
I think if a person want to get started doing this type of work, they need to find out what's going on and speak up, speak out, and defend your community, and express how you feel. And if something is coming in your territory, you protect your territory. You don't let anything just come in here and push you aside, just like the industry want to come in here and have us to move out and they move in. No, if it's your territory, you stand up and you fight for it and you speak up.
Let's go to Sybil, and then Mary Lou will have you close us out with a local view.
Really well said, Sharon. I think what I would say is to remember who you love and remember what you love, as a way to kind of stay grounded and keep the energy and momentum going. So in terms of like what to do, how to start, I would say concretely find a community, find a group, find a space where you can form strong relationships with people and activists that you can learn from and contribute to something bigger than yourself. You don't have to do it alone. So you can, there's all sorts of things to learn out there, but find a community that you can plug into. And I think you've got one here, which is already a huge first step. And to keep hopeful, again, I would say stay connected to the places you love. Remember why this matters to you. Visit the beaches and the forests and the green spaces and, you know, the places that make this matter to you. You know, why is it important to you that we keep our climate and our planet safe and livable? Give love to those places that you care about. And whenever you get overwhelmed, try to lean, this is my strange advice, but I try to lean more into anger than despair, because I find that to be a more energizing emotion that I can channel constructively into taking action. I find it more empowering than being sad. Get mad instead, but then channel it constructively with love.
Nice save. Well, we're right on the same page still. Jeez. Like I said, at first I was overwhelmed, and there were only 2 of us when I started that group, by the way, and you saw that beach. So I was overwhelmed. But the thing is that there are other like-minded people, and you know, you find those like-minded people, and if you don't find them at first, just know that they're out there. I mean, social media makes it a lot easier these days to find those groups. I'm in contact with people, you know, across the ocean. So, you know that you're not alone. And if you're a young person, look for the people that are already working on these things. There's so many young people working on all these issues, the climate issues. We've got local climate groups. Join a group. Use your talents. You know, do you want to write something? You know, take photos. You know, you can make a difference without, you know, being an expert. And I really think, you know, what you said, you're just not alone. There's so many of us working on this, and we welcome you with open arms, and we want to help each other because there's power in numbers, and we're all in this together. So we, you know, let's work together.
I want to give any last words to any of our panelists before we hand it over to Laura Gardner for a slide about next steps here. Info about that has also been posted in the chat.
I would just say you're all welcome to join the community at Break Free from Plastic. I shared the link in the chat. So one of many communities available to you. And I hope to stay in touch.
Wow. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists and to Reverend Jordan for being a wonderful moderator. I'm really excited to have started this conversation. So I've been putting some links in the chat as we go, and we will send these links out to you as well. But there are several next steps you can take. Be the solution. to Pollution is having another beach cleanup and brand audit on Saturday, August 7th. I recommend finding Be the Solution on Facebook because Mary Lou always posts about cleanups there. She does lots of cleanups all summer long, but this one is going to be special because we're going to do the brand audit again on Sunday, August 7th. And we would welcome, again, local speakers, especially youth, to come and share their thoughts on this like we had last time. We also encourage all of you to contact your senators and representatives to support the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which is a federal bill that would help us go in the right direction on all of these issues. Also, please push back in your local community to pass single-use plastic bans. The town where we live, Fairhaven, just recently passed a local ordinance that it will cost money to use a plastic bag in the grocery store. It's a small step in the right direction, but we need lots of actual bans in communities. And then as for how to support Sharon and the work that she does with Rise St. James, we strongly encourage you, if you're able to financially support Rise St. James through its partner organization, the Louisiana Bucket Brigade, and we will send that link out again. And also to sign the petition urging President Joe Biden to revoke the federal permits that have been issued to Formosa Plastics in St. James Parish, because this fight is all of our fight. Thank you so much to everyone who attended tonight. We are so glad you were able to make it. And we will share out the link to the presentation for the recording so that you can share it with your friends if you wish as well. And that is the end of our presentation. We will share all of these links and all of these contact details with you via email.
Great, thanks so much. And thanks again, panelists. I am inspired.
Thank you. Thanks for a great program.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Thank you, panelists, and good night to our...
Yes, and we will send out information about the Massachusetts state bills as well.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Mary Lou. Good luck.